people joining, but we're going to go ahead and get started as we have a lot to share out in a short time period. So my name is Susan Frankel. I am the CEO of the National Runaway Safe Line. I'm very excited to be spending this time with all of you today. Just a few sort of housekeeping logistics. As you just heard, well, first, just a reminder, as you're coming in, please don't forget to mute yourselves as we get started. But we are recording the session just to make everybody aware so that we are also then able to share it out later for other folks who may have not been able to join us today. And then just some reminders. I'm sure we are all very used to this, but as questions and comments come up, please don't forget to use the chat to share those things out. We do have folks who are monitoring the chat. We'll be sure to get to those either during the presentation, and we've left some time at the end as well. And certainly feel free just to get warmed up to start the chat, just to say hello, maybe let us know maybe where you're joining us from so we can give you a shout out on that front. But we are super excited again to kick off this afternoon as part of our series of events that have been part of our National Runaway Prevention Month activities and events. This Lunch and Learn is the second in a series that we're having. We are super excited to be here with Barbara Duffield, who's the Executive Director of Schoolhouse Connections, with Jillian Sitar, who is the Senior Higher Education Program Manager, also from Schoolhouse Connections, and then Sonia Pitsy, who is a Region 3 Coordinator from Pennsylvania. I will let them tell you more in just a minute about themselves, but we are super fortunate to have them with us. Schoolhouse Connection is a really important partner of the National Runaway Safe Lines, as well as just a really just a tireless advocate and voice on behalf of young people and young people experiencing homelessness across the country, and really ensuring that the important messages and key issues and challenges that are facing youth experiencing homelessness, particularly in educational settings, and the critical nature of what we all need to continue to be aware of, learn about, and be important voices on behalf of, is just a critical part of the conversation today. So with that, I'm going to kick it off and let these ladies take over and share their expertise and wisdom with all of us today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. We have a PowerPoint that we'll use as a guide. Most of today's Lunch and Learn will be a conversation, but we do have some resources we want to share with you. Specifically, today's topic for Lunch and Learn is the role of schools and runaway and prevention response. So next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with Schoolhouse Connection, we are a national organization working to overcome homelessness through education. We work from early childhood through K-12 through post-secondary. So for us, it's a continuum of learning, really focusing on the intersection of early care and schools, including higher education, working in partnership also with youth and with families. Lots of information on our website that you could check out later. Next slide, please. So today, our agenda, we're going to just a tiny bit of context about the role of K-12 generally and runaway prevention and response. And then we want to keep it real. So we have Sonia Pitsy with us from Region 3, Lincoln Intermediate Unit in Pennsylvania. Sonia's been doing this work for decades alongside me and always has insights and tips to share, and very energetic. So we will do a little back and forth with Sonia.
I hadn't heard back from the.
Well, then we will switch to higher education because again, it's a critical part of the learning continuum. We know that most jobs today require.
Still ain't working. What do you got?
I just looks like I got muted. It looks the jobs that are being created today require some form of education beyond high school. So in terms of a long-term prevention response, we need to be focused as well on that transition to higher education. So we'll have a little Q&A with Jillian Sitar on our team, who will tell you through some of the issues that we see and share with you some resources. So that's the agenda for today. Without further ado, we'll get into it. Next slide, please. All right. So just by way of context and framing, the connection between homelessness and education is really two directional. We know that homelessness causes many challenges that get in the way of getting an education, whether it's attending on a regular basis. We know that young people experiencing homelessness have double the rates of punitive discipline, and young people of color have even greater rates of punitive discipline. We know generally that students experiencing homelessness have among the lowest graduation rate of any subgroup, including low-income students who have housing. So we know that homelessness has an impact on educational attendance and attainment that's over and above simply being poor and living in stable housing. At the same time, we know that the lack of a high school degree is the single greatest risk factor for young adult homelessness. So there's a cycle here, and it's this cycle that we intend to break with the resources and the actions that we'll share with you today. Next slide. Again, we're not going to be assuming, we know that this is an audience that comes from different sectors, some schools, some youth service programs, some who may be brand new to the issue. So when we refer to the basic structure and rights of youth experiencing homelessness, and also the mechanism for prevention, we're really talking about the education subtitle of the McKinney-Vento Act. As a long history, most recently updated in 2015 as part of Every Student Succeeds Act, with goals around identification, enrollment, and success. There's lots of resources on our website, including a 2-page overview. So just by way of framing, when we refer to McKinney-Vento, that's what we're talking about, the education subtitle of the legislation. Next slide, please. And also, and Sonia will talk about this, and Jillian will talk about this as well, the people who people the McKinney-Vento system, both response and prevention, are those McKinney-Vento liaisons. Again, required to be designated in every local education agency, 10 specific duties, everything from identification to enrollment, transportation, professional development. So this is really, if you're outside of the school system, this is your point person for collaboration, for talking about prevention and response. We do have a national directory of liaisons on our website. Please know that there's high turnover, and one's required in every school district, so it's changing all the time. But nonetheless, if you get a bounce back, you can always go to the state page in our directory and connect with the state coordinator to find out who it is you can be partnering with. Next slide, please. All right, so now we're going to the Q&A part, and we've posed some questions for Sonia to help paint a picture both locally and regionally, and also help explain some of the strategies. So first, Sonia, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself a little bit about your role specifically as a regional coordinator, and also about the role of the liaisons in your region. You are muted.
I am unmuted now. So hello, everybody. So in Pennsylvania, we have a regional approach. And what that means is the state has divided the state into 8 different regions. So I cover Region 3, which is 8 counties. And this approach allows for every school district that has their education liaison designated, they are then connected with us under the regional program. And this is a great thing because every school district then in Pennsylvania is trained specifically on McKinney-Vento identification. They're trained specifically on how we can identify and provide services and eliminate barriers. And it also allows the schools, liaisons, counselors, anybody to access us anytime they need other additional services or just a listening ear. Sometimes we feel like we are in this individual thing in our own school, and by having regional coordinators, they can call us and bounce, process some different scenarios out. Is this not homeless? Is it, cover this? How do we do different things? So my region covers urban, suburban, and rural. And I think that one of the other great strengths of having it be regional is that we can adapt to every district's needs. So if we have something in York, which is considered urban, we can do things that are very York central, that because York has many services. Whereas if we provide something in Huntington, which is very rural, we know how we can connect community agencies or community partnerships such as churches or individual organizations and connect them that way. So it really empowers us to be able to do that. Is that what you wanted me to start with now for now?
Yep,
Barbara?
that just to give a little bit of context. So, and I'm glad that you mentioned that the region you cover includes urban, rural, and suburban, because we know that youth homelessness looks different in each of those and really does require a tailored response. And also the school systems have different kinds of resources depending there as well. So within that context, in your region right now, in all of those geographic areas, what does runaway and homelessness look like right now? You know, we're still in the pandemic. I always want to say post-pandemic, but we're not. We're in it. I'm in Michigan currently, so we're really in it. But if you could just describe kind of the school lens, like the school lens on runaway and youth homelessness currently.
What the population looks like are still the students who are being kicked out for various reasons, being kicked out for sexual orientation if the parent decides to choose the boyfriend or girlfriend over their child, drugs and alcohol. Students are also leaving on their own because they would rather live on their own or in a state of unknown rather than staying in a location where there are drugs and alcohol, where there is abuse, where there's anything going on that they know is just going to create more drama in their life than they want to deal with. And I think that's a pretty interesting way for kids to look at, students to look at, especially under the age of 18, to think, you know what I'm living in is worse than if I'm out on the street. And we have to make sure that we recognize that as their adults and educators, as we identify and work with them and what we can do to help them. And then it also, under 18 in Pennsylvania, and I would imagine everywhere, it's very hard to serve. We don't have under 18 shelters very prevalent. And if we do, the beds are very limited and they're always full. So that lens is really hard for us. And there are times where the hardest thing that we have to work with is breaking people's want to judge. Everybody wants to judge why someone may be an unaccompanied teenager or a runaway or whatever. And they're just like, well, just follow the rules. Well, if one of those rules is you can't be gay, or one of those rules is you have to, be trafficked, then no, that's better to get out of there. So breaking the judgment is always a big thing for us.
And in terms of it, it's, sometimes schools only find out once a young person has run away and they are experiencing homelessness. And that in and of itself is very challenging, that identification process. And yet schools are in many ways the best positioned because they are a universal entity in every school district.
Right.
On the prevention side, could you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen and done to actually, for schools to actually get ahead and try to prevent some of the runaway and homeless episodes?
I think one of the best things is street outreach. If you're able to do that, partner with people who can do that. I started when I was 25 and I've been doing this for 26 years. And one of the most important things that was pressed upon me by Rooster was that street outreach was key. You had to go to where folks were. And by continuing that route and continuing to be visible, and then you're creating a reputation of there's an adult out there that you can trust and you can talk to that person. So before they may get to that runaway point or where they're leaving home or whatever, then they can talk to that adult and say, this is what's going on. What can be helped? What can we do? And having that community within the unaccompanied youth realm that we work with, as well as the street outreach, is huge. And just making sure that everybody is aware of what Mckinney-Vento is, about what this looks like. And again, getting rid of that judgment lens and just being available and making sure that they're there. We, through this pandemic, as you said, we're not post-pandemic yet, but through the beginning of this, technology was very key. And technology, which I'm horrible at, kids, I do outreach in person, but then it was like I would just do York, or I would just do Carlisle, or I would just do Perry County. But now through Zoom, I can connect all of those students, and those students now kind of have like an underground network, and their underground network has provided them a community. So that's a great prevention thing, or at least a community thing.
And, there's a federal street outreach program that's funded by the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. But what you're talking about is, you as a homeless liaison coordinator yourself going out and doing that. And I think that's one thing that may not be fully appreciated, is just how many, it's certainly not every liaison, it's certainly not every school district, where there's very, very active outreach on the part of the school. And so they may be in a position to identify young people who are thinking about running or have run and connect them to services. So just really thinking about that, the eyes and ears piece. And can you talk a little bit about how you educate educators who aren't doing the street outreach so that they can be part of your eyes and ears, both for prevention and response?
So we go in and we will do a lot of the professional developments. We'll do Mckinney-Vento 101. We'll do any trainings that are specific to each job. It's not just an education liaison's job. It is everybody in the school district. So we're talking to those who are in transportation, those who are in food services, those who are coaches, maintenance, all of those folks, because the more eyes out there and the more who know, the more that we're going to be able to reach and talk with our students and be able to provide the services that they need. So it's really important that when we go in, we're big on creating and nurturing relationships with our school districts so that we can create and nurture those relationships within our community agencies, partners, as well as just the community at large.
I need to unmute myself. So I think that I'm looking at the chat box and I'm seeing that there are many people who are, some people who are working within the school system, some people who are working in community-based agencies. But what advice would you have? I guess I'll make it two-way. So if someone's listening to this and they're like, wow, that sounds like they got a great thing going on in Region 3, how would I connect with those people? And they're from outside the school district. What would be a good approach? I mean, it's one thing, obviously we have a directory, but like when you're approaching somebody about a partnership, and then also the flip for those who are working in school districts and trying to find out who are my youth serving providers. So if you could just give some advice for how to strengthen that partnership coming from either side.
Coming from either side, it's, I think the easiest thing, which seems silly to say, but just send an email and introduce yourself. Say, hi, I am so-and-so from such and such. I provide this service and I would really like to learn more about your program. Or I would really like to learn more about what the population looks like in your school. It's so important. Everybody just kind of just works in their own little thing, but we have to collaborate and we have to truly collaborate and truly communicate, not just use those as buzzwords. So just communicating and getting that introduction out there. Again, with our regional approach, it's great because we can bridge those relationships and create those pathways and be that person where like, all right, Sonia, how did you reach out to the housing authority? How did you reach out to the continuum of care, and how do we get on those different things? And we're part of coalitions and we're part of task force and the continuum of care, which has all of the housing and community agencies that work with human services, et cetera. So just contact one person and from there just keep going.
And if you don't get the right person, then certainly we're happy to play a role as well. Be happy to do some matchmaking on our end. We do have a question that I want to ask you before we transition to some of the new resources that are available and pathways to higher education. I like the idea of street outreach via Zoom. What happens on these Zoom meetings with the youth involved?
I can't even pretend to say that I created this formally. This started out as I couldn't do a whole lot in person. I would do things in person, we'd meet in parks, etc. But there was I was all the social distancing, and then with Zoom and everybody, once we knew everybody had technology, we then set up this Zoom room and said, hey, if you need to talk at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever time it was, we'll be on and we'll go from there. So from there, they've been doing game nights every week. We've done reading nights. The teenagers have actually created during breaks, like over the Thanksgiving break, they're going to be doing things with the kids, the littles, they call them, at motels and hotels and shelters, and they'll be doing scavenger hunts and reading and things like that. But then they'll just have like a support group on their own. I really step back from, I allow them to be empowered in how that looks. I don't need to do anything other than have that connection and that Zoom room space available if that's what they need. And then we've also just kind of allowed them to have their own space because sometimes they just need to say things that I don't even need to know. They just need to talk. So, but by having this, if you're looking to do it formally and start it out, just start blitzing social. I say that like I know how to do that. I don't. Facebook is what I use. My nieces tell me that's for old people. I'm all right with that. But then they have the other socials. But then also just now with schools, they can blast out things and word of mouth. Word of mouth, I'm telling you, and these kids just know how to get that out there. But I think if you're going to do it formally, just say, hey, here's a Zoom room on such and such a day every time at 5 o'clock, we're going to have it's open to anybody.
Very much. We're going to switch gears every bit so slightly. I want to let everyone know about some new resources that were provided to schools specifically as part of COVID relief, and that offer some new opportunities for partnering with school districts in a much more integrated way. So next slide, please. So as part of the American Rescue Plan, there was an unprecedented $800 million provided specifically to support the identification and attendance of children and youth experiencing homelessness, including through wraparound services. And this is new, the first time that phrase has ever been in federal law. So this is also, just to give you a sense, it's 8 times the typical appropriation for the McKinney-Vento program, and it's more in one appropriation than the past 10 years combined. So it really is an opportunity to do a lot in terms of partnerships and building up capacity. And the funds can be spent over 3 years. So next slide, please. We have just a commercial advertisement for a document that we will continue to update about how these funds can be used. And I hope whether you're coming from the school side, or you're coming from the community-based provider side, you see some things that would be helpful in your area. Note too that states are in very different places in terms of how they've actually gotten these dollars out. They went out in 2 phases. So for many states, the majority, the second wave of funds have not gone out yet, which means now is a great time to begin these conversations locally. Next slide, please. But just to illustrate some of the specific allowable uses for these funds, and I want to emphasize that this is broader and more flexible funding than is typically provided through the McKinney-Vento program. And that's really critical as well, specifically for helping our runaway and unaccompanied homeless youth. So I'm not going to go through and read all of these pieces here. I do want to note number 4 here, which is the wraparound services. And again, that's new and broader than typical funds. Also the supplies. So for example, we did a webinar last week with a liaison from San Antonio. He's buying unaccompanied youth cell phones with 2-year contracts. So they will have that connectivity in order to help with regular attendance and support. Next slide, please. Additional funds, again, we know transportation is a need. The one piece that I want to call out here, 2 pieces in particular that are new and to, I would say, approach with caution, but typically education dollars cannot be used for housing. And that's important because there's billions of dollars in housing funds that young people should be able to access. But what this does do is recognize that in a crisis, a school may be positioned to help on a very short-term basis, like a couple days in a motel, just to bridge for a young person to get into a longer-term housing option. So that's a new flexibility. And again, we're approaching it with caution because we don't want to sort of alleviate the other systems that should be providing housing, but we do recognize that in a crisis, young people need a place to stay. But also, once a government or charity pays for a motel, they then become HUD homeless, so then eligible for HUD homeless assistance. So I call that out. And I also want to call out the store cards or prepaid debit cards, which many districts have found to be incredible because they're very, very flexible. So you don't need to have a particular size shoe, et cetera. It allows families and youth much more agency. And of course, the big piece is increasing capacity because services don't provide services, people provide services. So whether it's on the school side capacity or on the community-based organization capacity, that is a critical and probably number 1 need. So with that, next slide, please. I want to, one more slide and then I'll go back to Sonia. So the Department of Education, sorry, I hope you don't have whiplash from the back and forth, but I want to go back to community partnership slide for just a second. The U.S. Department of Education has really emphasized for school districts to partner with their community-based organizations and has permitted subcontracting with local youth agencies as a way to expand capacity, as a way to build in wraparound support. So just know that that's a big piece of this effort as well. So with that, Sonia, I'd be curious to know what you're hearing about uses of these funds in your area, particularly as it pertains to runaway and homeless youth and to the partnership piece, as well as capacity.
I think one of the great things that I'm hearing that we're doing across the state as well, not just within our region, is that we are really focusing on a lot of that outreach that I was talking about. So we're having the community outreach as well as the street outreach. We're going to be doing, for instance, in our region, we'll be having a lot of open house type events for different populations. We're going to really aim focuses on joining populations that might have cultural diversity groups and LGBTQ groups and rural areas and urban areas and all of that, and just kind of having those things to create that initial part of it. We're also working on a lot of it throughout the state. Again, mental health is just such a huge thing. So we're really trying to focus on mental health, both for students and for educators. I think people are forgetting that the adults who are in this, who are helping our students, are also flailing, and we need to help raise them up and continue to build make their foundation strong so that we can continue our services continue to have quality services for our students. We're going to be doing a lot of the summer programs that are going to help connect and do credit recovery and those types of things. We're going to have there's going to be some folks who are doing things with their higher education pieces. And let's see, I'm just kind of looking through some of those. But I think the biggest is we're really just increasing that capacity. We're going to hire where we're able to, but make sure that direct service dollars and transportation in needs. And the hotel motel thing is a little, we definitely want to be very cautious about that. So figuring out how to do that and partnering with the housing agencies to do that so that they're the ones that are looking to give it versus it seeming like it's coming from a school district, and just being very creative and starting that here are these great pots of money that we're not used to. We're used to spending $5 a year on a student, and now we're being asked to spend $2,000 a year on a student. We got to spend this money? But how can we do this? And then possibly after 2024, what relationships have we built that we can continue then having some sustainability?
Thank you. And I know I've also heard school districts who are very important, consulting with young people themselves, consulting with parents themselves, consulting with community-based organizations, because the idea is for this to have sustainable change. So if you don't do a comprehensive needs assessment, the goal is not to have like the fanciest backpacks and just give stuff, it's really to improve the capacity, improve the partnerships, and make sure we can have an impact right now at this moment of great need, including on the bookends, which would be early and transition to higher education. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that piece. And speaking of transition to higher education, I can see Jillian smiling. Next slide, please. I'm going to turn it over to Jillian to talk a little bit about some of the higher education pieces in all of this.
Thank you, Barbara. So hi, everyone. Again, my name is Jillian Sitar, and I'm the Senior Higher Ed Program Manager at Schoolhouse Connection. And I really work to transition students to and through higher education by sharing various best practices, but also removing barriers both on the state and federal level. And so, at Schoolhouse Connection, we truly do believe education can overcome homelessness. And so with higher education, it can completely change a person or family's life trajectory to really kind of overcome that cycle of homelessness. And so as Barbara said earlier, over 95% of jobs since 2010 have gone to college educated workers. And it is expected that by 2027, 70% of all jobs will require some education beyond a high school degree. So higher education is extremely important for all students, but really in particular for our students with experience in homelessness or in foster care. Higher ed is also linked to better health and well-being outcomes. And we have known that our students have always existed on these college campuses. They've always been there. But the pandemic has really just kind of shined a light on this particular issue and the equity gaps that lay within higher education. So when the pandemic first happened in March 2020, there were all these campus closures and students had nowhere to go. And with the pandemic, that was March 2020, we're here about to be within 2 years. We've just seen continuously drops in retention and enrollment and within FAFSA numbers. And so there was a study that came out in the fall of 2020 that found that about 14% of students experienced homelessness in college. And we expect that number actually could be a lot higher because, we lost a lot of students in that retention piece, but also students that typically fill out that survey or fill out surveys in general, they have the time to do so, they have the capacity, and they have the technology. And so we really want to make sure we're doing that intentional outreach for our students and assist them with financial aid so they can, access financial aid and pursue that post-secondary degree, but they tend to face a lot of barriers along the way. Next slide. So filling out the FAFSA is definitely, one of the first steps that students face when accessing and trying to pursue a post-secondary degree. And filling out the FAFSA is a pretty complicated process, but it's particularly difficult for our unaccompanied homeless youth. And so those are youth who are under the age of 24, who lack, a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, but also are not in that physical custody of a parent or guardian. And these students are considered independent students, which means they lack or they do not need to include their parental information on the FAFSA, which is huge for these individuals. Youth who are unaccompanied, at risk of homelessness, and self-supporting are also considered independent students as well. And you can kind of see the different definitions of at risk of homelessness here on that slide. And so even though they are independent students, with filling out the FAFSA, they do need to provide some documentation to prove their homelessness with a determination letter. And so I'll talk about that a little bit later. But for students who are experiencing homelessness with their families, they will not be considered independent students, and they will just fill out the FAFSA as instructed. And so I just wanted to make that kind of two key distinctions between unaccompanied and homeless youth. All right, next slide. So unaccompanied homeless youth need to provide that determination letter that states and proves their unaccompanied homeless youth status. And so there are currently 4 different entities that can provide this determination letter. So school district liaisons, so Sonia was kind of talking about their role, a director, a designee of a HUD or RHYS shelter, and then lastly, a financial aid administrator. And so we have, and I can link to this a little bit later, but we have data of all the unaccompanied homeless youth determinations within the FAFSA over the last 7 years. And we'll get the new FAFSA data next year, which will be really great because that will show us, the direct impact of FAFSA numbers and the pandemic. But typically, in general, school district liaisons make the most amount of determinations, followed by RHYA shelter or designee. So that's great that we kind of have those two folks joining in on this conversation today. And then financial aid administrators tend to make the least amount of determinations. And so we can go to the next slide. If you're kind of wondering, how do I make this letter? Where does this letter exist? We actually have a sample form letter that you can use. And so I'm putting it here in the chat as well. But this is all you need to do to fill out this form and provide for the student so they can include it within the FAFSA. It is a really easy form. Financial aid administrators, there's a specific one that NCHE has for financial aid administrators to make that determination. But for everyone else, you can just use this form, and it's really, easy and straight to the point, and we update that form every single year. And so what's important to note for our students currently, as they're filling out the FAFSA every single year, they also need to provide a determination letter. So just make sure that you inform your students that this is a process that happens, every single year, and they'll continue to need to include this determination letter. So I think the next slide is our Q&A portion.
Yes, so this is I always wanted to be a journalist, so I put myself in the role of interviewer. So Jillian, I know we get a lot of contact from young people. We get contacted from higher ed. We get contacted from youth service providers. What are the most common FAFSA challenges that come to you from youth and from service provider? Where do you see the most challenges coming up?
Yeah, I think definitely one of the big ones for students is just filling out the FAFSA, because it is really complicated to begin with, but sometimes students get kind of tripped up on that homelessness question because they might be with their family, or they might be unaccompanied, or they just don't even know that they're homeless themselves and even qualify or are eligible to filling that out. And so that's definitely, the first big barrier there. And then working with providers and other folks that help make those determination letters. Sometimes students will provide those letters to the institution, and then the institution will push back. And they'll say, no, we need more documentation. We need more than just this letter. Sometimes they'll pry and ask really intrusive questions for the students that make them uncomfortable. And it can be really, re-traumatizing and re-triggering for these students. Over the pandemic, we had one of our students that was asked to, provide a notarized item back to the institution, which it was the middle of the pandemic. How is a student supposed to be able to print something out, get something notarized, and then mail it back to the institution? And so having all these additional barriers that really aren't necessary, it causes a delay in financial aid, which then causes delay in the student getting that money. And it can prolong this whole process, which can make the student realize, this isn't worth it. I don't really want to go through this process year after year. And it could be that one thing to prevent a student from pursuing that post-secondary degree.
So talk about some of the strategies. We've been doing a lot, and you in particular have been doing a lot to overcome those strategies. And if you want to talk about what, if you want to do a plug for the FAFSA mentor, we have a great example of a Maryland school district that's using their ARP dollars to support young people. So if you could give some general strategies and then maybe do a plug for that program and webinar.
So sound go ahead, what now?
Okay, I think someone may not be muted right now, but I will go ahead and talk through some of those strategies. The first one is letting students know as soon as possible that the FAFSA is out starting on October 1st. So we want to make sure our students fill it out, ASAP, so they can get the most amount of aid as possible. We really like to do that targeted outreach to students. So we see some campuses let students know, hey, you mark down you are experiencing homelessness, or you're just generally an independent student on the FAFSA. It might take you some time to provide that additional documentation. Maybe start doing this process right now. And so doing that intentional outreach and then nudging. So it's okay to send, that one email on October 1st, but maybe if they haven't filled it out in 2 weeks, send another email. Keep sending those emails, whether it's through emails or through text messages. Nudging has proven to work through the various research, and we actually have been doing that with our own scholars. So we really send out a lot of emails letting folks know, but we also incentivize with our students to let them know, hey, if you fill out the FAFSA before this time, we will give you a $25 gift card or something along those lines. And that really, incentivizes and encourages students to fill out that FAFSA. Another strategy to kind of remove barriers is just seeing some really innovative ways to help students fill it out. So it is a complicated process. There are a ton of resources, both on our website, but through other organizations that help walk through the FAFSA step by step as if you're working with a student. And so we can also include in the chat archived webinars that we've done to kind of highlight and streamline that process. But just making sure that students know that you're available to help and assist in any capacity. I think that kind of relieves that burden for students and kind of, helps them relax a little bit that they're not the only ones filling it out. And then other strategies is just being, really creative with partnerships. So if you are not the person that can help a student fill out the FAFSA, partner with someone who knows how to do so. So partnering with a local community college that does FAFSA nights, or maybe some high schools do FAFSA nights as well. We were seeing FAFSA drive-thrus happening. So with the pandemic, there were some colleges and high schools that would have events in a parking lot where cars will come through and they would help, just like a drive-through, help students fill out the FAFSA. They had, a hotspot all set up and everything, which is really cool that they were able to, meet students and meet families where they're at and help them fill out this, help fill out the FAFSA. And then I'm also excited to announce that just in general, a lot of the barriers that I talked about, there were new provisions in the FAFSA Simplification Act that will just remove a lot of these barriers, which is great. And so it will really streamline that process. And we have a great archived webinar where we talk through these different provisions that I think Barbara might be looking to as well. And so that will just be super helpful for our students to just, again, streamline that process. And so if you aren't familiar with those, I highly suggest you check those out on our in the chat, because it's going to be just a complete game changer for our students.
And I think the next slide is an overview of some of the other resources that we have. Yes, go ahead, Jillian, I'll let you walk through this.
Yep, so we have our general Schoolhouse Connection FAFSA page. It has all things FAFSA and it breaks things out in different sections. So if you are a youth, you click this button, it shows you all the different youth resources. If you are in the K-12 or service provider, you'll get all your resources, and then same for financial aid and whatnot. And so I just wanted to highlight our most popular, probably FAFSA resources for students is financial aid for youth who are homelessness or at risk of homelessness or on their own. And here is, I put it in the chat, but it's a really great flow chart for helping students figure out, what do I do? How do I fill this out? And what information do I need to provide? And then we just released this new resource called How to Answer FAFSA Questions About Homelessness. And so we took screenshots of the actual questions and kind of walked through how you answer those questions and how to request additional documentation if needed. So those are our two big youth FAFSA resources. And then for providers, we also created a template that I will also include in the chat as well. And so if you have a listserv already or a Google group or just, a group of individuals that you're reaching out to, you can copy and paste this template. And again, it just outlines that the FAFSA is out, what you need to provide, what documentation if needed. And it's just a really easy, streamlined way to just get this information out to students as quick as possible. And then again, I mentioned that tool for financial aid administrators, but we also have that sample form letter that you can use as well to provide that determination letter. And then lastly, we have our higher ed page. So we have a ton of resources for our students that are in college, including these tip sheets that are living documents that share best practices that colleges are doing to provide for support for these students. And so if you are doing something that's really innovative, please reach out to me. My email is here because we'd love to highlight your work on our tip sheets. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Barbara.
Thank you very much. So I think there's just one more slide, and then we can take some questions globally about anything. Yes, a very important slide. So we are having our first national convening on student homelessness, which is a summit, and recognizing that homelessness is not a single agency issue, recognizing that it does take a team. What's unique about our convening is we're asking people to come in teams. If you can create your own local team, and a team is just basically 2 or more people from different agencies, there's a discount. If you want to come as an individual and be paired by a goal, like say you're really into higher ed or you're really into high school graduation, then we'll pair on the back end. But we're really excited about this, which will be our first convening, and really focusing on these 3 goals: early childhood, K-12 graduation, and higher education, with a real focus on teams and action planning. Because what we've seen over the pandemic is that sometimes it's just a matter of having a convener to get people together, create an action plan, and then a little bit of support following it through. So for example, we've been able to work in other states and counties and seen numbers of homeless youth actually go up, identified by schools, when others were going down, because of an intentional conversation with community-based organizations zeroing in on populations that are less likely to be identified, even though they may be more prevalent in the community. So action planning is going to be a big, important part of this summit as well. And next slide. Just general resources here. I want to stop though. We still have about 12 minutes left. So first of all, Sonia, did anything that Jillian say about higher education or resources or anything that I said about ARP spark any thoughts for you in terms of things that you'd like the audience to know about, again, really from a school lens?
No, again, I think the biggest thing that people can take from this is that there's always someone somewhere who you can talk with, and it doesn't matter where in the country you are. You can contact anybody, any one of us, and we can find information for you, share information where, Project Harmony asked, hey, I like that Zoom idea. How can we do that? Don't reinvent it. Let me share what's happened. And I think that that's just a great, anytime you can just have conversations, it's great. So just reach out.
Thank you.
And then I forgot to add about the FAFSA Mentor webinar. So yes, we are going to be hosting a webinar with Frederick County, Maryland next Wednesday, and I'm putting the registration link in the chat as well. But they were able to use their Title I, and they'll use their ARP HCY2 funds to create this position for helping students fill out the FAFSA, which is awesome. So not only are they helping students fill out the FAFSA, but they're also helping students plan, what are they going to do with life after graduation? So it's really kind of thinking through that, just because you're graduated from high school, all the support ends there. Let's set you up for success and get you connected to either the college that you're going to, or the workforce, or whatever have you. So tune in to that session. It's going to be next Wednesday, and it's going to be kind of similar to this. It's going to be more, we want folks to be asking questions. So please register and stay tuned.
Thank you, Jillian. And we're gonna try to continue to highlight these innovative ideas with the ARP HCY funds, both in our newsletter, which would encourage folks to sign up for, and the liaisons. We've been doing a weekly 30-minute conversation with the liaison, both about eviction prevention, but also about their use of ARP. And I'm really excited to see ideas like more systems navigators, more housing navigators, and some post-secondary transition navigators positions that are being created with the new ARP fund. So we just really encourage everyone to reach out to their school district, or if you're in a school district, reach out to your community partnership and really think about the needs assessment that you could be doing with your young people and families to make sure we make the best use of those funds. I am going to stop here. We still have 10 minutes left, and just see if there are questions that anyone would have for Sonia or Jillian or myself.
Quiet group.
There was a question a bit back in the presentation. I'm not sure if I think we touched on it, but maybe just to elaborate around the idea of doing and providing street outreach via Zoom. There was a question about what happens on the Zoom meeting when youth are involved, and sort of maybe elaborating a little bit more about what that might look like, or as well as maybe even elaborating how some of these other things you're speaking to have been addressed and done more online or virtually, just given, I think as someone noted earlier, a lot of the world, the country is sort of moving around as if there's no COVID. We all know that it's continuing, and we're still all working through those systems. So maybe that's a place to start.
Sonia talked a little bit about that, but I want to tee her up again and tell a story that early in the pandemic that really struck me about what schools can do. It was very early on, and I think I needed a media reporter was asking me for somebody, and Sonia's always got a quote ready and a great story. So I reached out to Sonia and I was like, hey, what's happening? I know it's early. And Sonia talked about going to campgrounds and places where young people were staying in their cars. And I get emotional every time I think about this, but she brought her phone. So she was the hotspot. She brought the food. So she was the cafeteria. She brought the schoolwork. So she was the teacher. She brought laundry coins. So she was the laundromat. So it was just really poignant in terms of the connections that young people made. Of course, that's not sustainable, but I want to kind of just use that to illustrate kind of how these pieces can come together in various roles. And Sonia, if you want to riff off of any one of those pieces, including the Zoom outreach, that'd be great.
Well, from those, because again, everybody had to get creative when everything shut down. So where school, even people didn't realize that all the public facilities were closed down. So washrooms were no longer available. Libraries where I would tell kids to go to were closed. Laundromats were closed. So how do we do this? And figuring out all that. Hotspots were hard to come by. Chromebooks were on like a 9-month delay of getting, all of that. So how do we do that? So I would just start those meetings of going to those kids and just being like, all right, I'm going to meet at this park. I'm going to be the hotspot. Here's how we do this, or do all these things. But from that, they then were like, okay, now we have the technology. From this technology, let's get together and have a meeting amongst all of us, and let's share a resource. Let me tell you how I've done laundry from this storage place facility here. If you go down here, or you go down there, or if you talk to this person, they'll give you free pizza, or there's leftovers that they always allow folks to have. It's just a great community thing through their technology. And again, just allowing that space, that Zoom technology space, or again, they have this underground thing. Like they will tell me of kids that are out there. I heard about someone from a different county, and that night, a couple hours later, they're like, hey, we know this kid. And I'm like, I just found out about this kid. How'd you know about it? And it's because they are creating those connections through technology, but knowing that there's that base, that you can be that base. I always tell Barbara, we can be the starting ripples of things. And the fact that they do story nights is fantastic. The fact that we do game nights is hilarious. But we also have had a great support from some businesses. Amazon found out that we were doing some things, and they're like, what can we do to help? Well, chargers, if you don't have electricity, what are you using? So we found these solar things, like solar chargers. How amazing is that? You don't think about that because we just plug into our phone or our chargers at home. They don't have that. Some places, the storage units don't have electricity. They don't have heat. They don't have any of that. So what can we do? And businesses, once they know of something, they're usually very like, what can we do to help? And you just got to key into that. What can't we use our monies for that businesses want to do?
And Sonia, your young people are graduating, all right?
Yes. Everyone that I do outreaches to has graduated or is graduating. And a lot of them go on to be just very successful, either through post-secondary education, trade school, or, jobs that they are just thriving and getting their own place on. And I'm lucky enough to know so many post-graduation and who are now my resources for the kids that I work with now. So I get to go to graduations, which is so exciting. I do outreaches because I'm selfish.
Well, in our last few minutes here, thank you so much. Thank you to the three of you, for sharing such critical and important information, and for being with us today. We are incredibly appreciative of the knowledge and expertise, and certainly the passion and the commitment that you are sharing with us as well today. I just want to take a minute to remind folks that we do have an additional lunch and learn coming up on November 30th following the Thanksgiving holiday, that there's still plenty of time to register for. This is going to be a lunch and learn around youth in crisis, what the data is telling us, which is I will be presenting with someone from Chapin Hall, and we'll be sharing out a deeper look at data that we published as part of a 2020 data report on crisis services and the prevention work that we're doing through the National Runaway Safe Line. So very excited to share that out. There's still plenty of time to also engage around National Runaway Prevention Month. Please head to our website, which hopefully someone will post here in just a moment in the chat, as a link to the additional activities and things that we have going on. You will find links to some of the other resources and things that were highlighted today on our website, as well as we strongly encourage the relationships and partnerships across the board with all of you and with each other, and certainly with our national partners. I want to also then just emphasize one of the key things that came among the myriad of very helpful specific information, just the importance of really making sure at all levels that we understand what's happening for young people within the school system, what the school system is doing and what resources available, but making sure that we're also reaching out and building those relationships and connecting to highlight and work together to emphasize all of the other resources that we all bring to the table, as we're all here for the same purpose, which is ensuring that youth are safe off the streets and have access to available services, support, and systems that are out there for them. And so with that, as we are winding up here and approaching a holiday week, I certainly wish everyone a safe and healthy and happy week of celebration in whatever way that you celebrate or acknowledge this week, and wish you all the best. And we hope to see you next Tuesday.
One quick question. Someone asked, I think in a private channel, is the recording, I know it's being recorded, but will it be shared out? Will people have access to the archive?
So we will be providing it, and it will be posted on our website as well. So thank you again.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.